Chapter 41, The Violent Game. Anduin, I didn't expect you to be so fierce when you swear. Did you see Traverse's face? It turned red, Vivian said, covering her mouth with a smile as she watched everyone leave. But you are Slytherin students. This will make your situation in the academy worse. It's my fault for causing you trouble, she added, feeling shy and blaming herself. You don't need to apologize to anyone. Retreating will only encourage them. Only by learning to fight back can you become stronger. Weakness is the original sin. Although I don't like trouble, I'm not afraid of it. And as a Muggle-born wizard in Slytherin, you should be mentally prepared, Anduin said calmly, looking at Charles. These pure-blood wizards weren't enough to keep him up at night. Then he turned to Vivian and said, If they dare to trouble you, just tell me, and I'll find a way to handle it. Vivian nodded. Don't worry, Senior Vanessa takes good care of us, and I'm the third in line to the Bulstrode family. They wouldn't dare do anything to me. Anduin admired Vivian a bit. He didn't expect her to be the third heir. No wonder she, a child of a squib and a muggle, was so valued by her family. It seemed that Vivian's family was in dire straits. After chatting for a while, the three of them entered the stadium separately. Anduin and Vivian found seats in the stands, where senior sister Vanessa had reserved a place for them. I heard you had a conflict with Travers at the gate of the stadium. We must learn to unite in our academy. The current situation isn't good, and the Academy Cup is still far away, Vanessa said, instructing the two of them. Anduin couldn't help but pout at Vanessa's words. He didn't want to destroy unity, but he feared some people wouldn't like it. In his opinion, Vanessa was too weak. Warnings and advice were useless without tough measures to control those rebellious little snakes. They dealt with Vanessa casually, and she had no choice but to accept it. As a prefect, she was obsessed with winning the Academy Cup, but due to the undercurrent of the Wizarding War, there had been constant internal conflict in Slytherin. Slytherin hadn't won the Academy Cup since she entered the school. Almost every year, they clashed with Gryffindor, only to watch Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff take the prize. Today's gloomy weather seemed to foreshadow the rough game ahead. After the players entered the field, Mrs. Rolanda Hooch blew the whistle, officially starting the first Quidditch match of the school year. Anduin had never seen such a savage sport. From the beginning, players collided, including the Seekers. The Chasers didn't shoot after getting the quaffle, but instead attacked their opponents. It was almost absurd, as if they were passing the ball to the other team on purpose. The Beaters were even more aggressive. They hit the bludgers towards their opponents whenever they could, and when the bludgers weren't around, they swung their bats at each other. Both teams employed tactics. Gryffindor formed a ring formation to surround Slytherin, while Slytherin players formed a triangle to launch a group charge. Anduin watched with great interest, but Mrs. Hooch couldn't stand it any longer and called a timeout. Neither side had taken a single shot in the first half. In just 10 minutes, several players from both teams had bruised noses and swollen faces. Anduin couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. He was actually more interested in the brawl than the Quidditch match itself. The various tactical maneuvers from both sides were also quite eye-opening for him. During a brief pause, both Professor McGonagall and Madam Hooch came onto the field to warn the teams. The game resumed shortly after, but the intensity remained high. Fouls of all kinds continued to occur. Double punches, elbows, pulls, kicks. Anduin even saw a player spit at an opponent, which gave him a strange sense of déjà vu. It reminded him of a game called Violence Motorcycle that he had played in his previous life. Madam Hooch seemed to be blowing her whistle non-stop, calling fouls, awarding free throws, and then calling more fouls. The entire game was unfolding in this bizarre atmosphere, and Professor McGonagall, who was commentating, looked livid at the farce. The game dragged on for over an hour. Slytherin had one player sent off and another injured. Gryffindor's Seeker had also fallen off his broom, breaking his leg. The current situation left Slytherin with only 5 players, putting them at a numerical disadvantage. Although Gryffindor had one more player, they were without a Seeker. In Quidditch, there are no substitutes, so the game could only end if the Golden Snitch was caught or if both team captains agreed to end it. Given the captains' hostile attitudes, a friendly agreement seemed unlikely. Without a seeker, Gryffindor's strategy shifted. They assigned 2 players to interfere with Slytherin's seeker, making it nearly impossible for the game to end anytime soon. Another hour passed, and the score had shifted to 110 to 280 in Gryffindor's favor. With 1 extra player, Gryffindor found it much easier to score goals. However, the Slytherin seeker had no intention of going after the golden snitch. Catching it would mean losing the game. This strange match grew even more peculiar. The Slytherin seeker focused on conserving energy, while the rest of the team struggled with their reduced numbers. With one of their 5 players being the seeker, it was effectively a 4-on-6 situation, making it nearly impossible for Slytherin to mount any effective attacks. End of this chapter. Chapter 42. Protection Fee. In Anduin's eyes, the game had devolved into chaos. The Slytherin seekers were all over the field, trying to interfere with the Gryffindor players, but they made no attempt to catch the golden snitch. The Gryffindor players, fearing that any further attacks would only worsen their situation, huddled defensively in front of their goal. Meanwhile, the remaining Slytherin players aggressively attacked, trying to break through Gryffindor's defenses. Anduin estimated that the game wouldn't end anytime soon. Not wanting to waste more time, he informed Vivian and left the stadium alone. From a distance, Travers noticed Anduin's departure. With a grim smile, he whispered something to Randall Rosier, and the two left the audience stands to follow him. Anduin quickly sensed the movement behind him. The tracking was blatant and unskilled, confirming his suspicion that Travers was up to something. Deciding to confront the situation head-on, Anduin changed his direction, heading not towards Hogwarts Castle, but taking a detour to the Owl Shack. Travers and Rosier, seeing Anduin's change in direction, sneered and quickened their pace to catch up. When they saw Anduin approaching the Owl Shack, they noticed he didn't go inside, but instead walked around it, heading to the back. Travers assumed Anduin had spotted them and was trying to escape, so he hurried Rosier to keep up. As they rounded the shack, they found Anduin leaning against the wall, waiting for them. Travers, seeing Anduin had stopped running, stepped forward with a sneer. "You dirty mudblood, why don't you run?" he began, but before he could finish, a curse hit him hard, knocking him out cold. Rosier, seeing Anduin attack without a word, fumbled for his wand in a panic. Anduin couldn't help but smirk at Rosier's amateurish behavior. He didn't even have his wand ready. How embarrassing for someone trying to play the bully. Anduin didn't attack Rosier immediately. Instead, he calmly stepped forward. Rosier, finally managing to pull out his wand, held it tightly with both hands and nervously yelled, "You, don't come any closer. If you do, I will." Anduin, looking at Rosier with contempt, replied, "What will you do if I come closer? Will you commit suicide?" Rosier, even more nervous, thought Anduin intended to kill him. Believing he was led to this secluded spot to be murdered, Rosier closed his eyes tightly and with a scream fired a spell. The spell missed Anduin by several positions, but its power was notable. "Oh, it seems that tension and fear can also increase the power of a spell," Anduin mused, rubbing his chin. He then glanced at the frantic Rosier and said, "Stop shouting. No one will come to save you, no matter how loud you scream." Instead of calming down, Rosier screamed louder, firing spells randomly. All of them missed Anduin. Annoyed, Anduin waved his wand, disarming Rosier. He then stepped forward, kicked Rosier to the ground, and placed his right foot on Rosier's chest. Leaning down, he pointed his wand at Rosier's throat and coldly asked, "Do you want to die?" Rosier, in pain and terrified, could only tremble under Anduin's gaze. Kicked and trampled, he could only beg for mercy. "Don't kill me, don't. It's all Travers' doing, not mine. I was just dragged into this by him." Anduin let out a long sigh, feeling a wave of depression wash over him. Why is it so difficult to communicate with these pure-blooded people? Could it be that the inbreeding has dulled their minds? "Shut up. I told you to shut up, and I don't want to say it again," Anduin commanded, his cold eyes fixed on Rosier. Rosier swallowed hard and finally stopped his babbling. Instead, he began to cough violently, his throat hoarse from shouting and his chest aching from being trampled. Seeing this, Anduin lifted his foot off Rosier's chest, squatted beside him, and asked, "Are you afraid?" Rosier took a shaky breath and replied hoarsely, "Yes, I'm afraid." Anduin continued, "Do you dare to provoke me in the future?" No, no, I will stay away from you. I will warn Travers not to mess with you, Rosier stammered. Heh, that's not necessary. If he wants to trouble me, you can encourage him to come. Don't be polite, Anduin said with a smile. Rosier, thinking Anduin was mocking him, hurriedly replied, No, I don't dare. I will keep him away from you. Seeing that Rosier was thoroughly terrified, Anduin extended a hand and pulled him up. Rosier, now standing, felt his legs give way and was about to collapse again. Anduin held him firmly, helping him stabilize. He then reached out to brush the dust off Rosier's clothes and said with a smile, I'm serious. You don't have to stop him from coming to trouble me in the future. But if you want, you can give me a heads up. Rosier, confused by Anduin's words, realized that Anduin wanted him to act as an informant. Not knowing what Anduin might do if he refused, Rosier looked at him with growing fear and said, Okay, but if I'm found out, I'm finished. Don't worry, if you are obedient, I will protect you. Rosier, have you heard of a protection fee? Anduin asked, his smile widening as if he had just thought of something delightful. Rosier, unfamiliar with the term, asked nervously, Protection fee? What does that mean? Anduin explained with a grin, You give me 10 galleons every month, and I will be responsible for your safety. Rosier, realizing the implication, thought to himself, Isn't this extortion? And he calls it a protection fee? But seeing Anduin's grin and feeling his grip tighten, Rosier could only ask nervously, But what if I don't have that much money? What if I can't pay it? End of this chapter. Chapter 43, News. Hey, aren't all of your pure-blooded families extremely rich? Why do you still care about this money? If you don't have the money, you can just ask your family for it. Of course, if they don't give it, then I can only protect you. Anduin emphasized the word protection with an evil smile on his face, staring at Rosier quietly. Rosier felt the grip on his arm tighten and his face twisted in pain. No matter how foolish he was, he understood the implication. If he didn't protect himself, he would suffer the consequences. In an instant, Rosier felt that his Hogwarts career had plunged into darkness, but he could only bite the bullet and agree. Seeing Rosier's reluctance, Anduin rolled his eyes and thought for a moment before saying, Rosier, I'm not trying to make things difficult for you. If you really don't have the money in the future, you can replace it with something else. What? Rosier asked hurriedly. Anduin smiled and said, Intelligence. Your Rosier family's collection of books, for instance. Or, Anduin glanced at Travers, who was lying next to him, and added, You can let this guy bring money and come to trouble me. What you get from him can be deducted from your part. With that, Anduin let go of Rosier, walked over to Travers, and rummaged through his belongings, finding a bag of money. Anduin counted it and found 12 gold galleons and 6 sickles. Look, isn't this worth your portion for this month? I'll give you a fraction next month. Just count your protection fee as 8 gold galleons. If you want to make a big contribution in the future, I'll reward you additionally. How about it? This condition isn't bad. Anduin smiled at Rosier. Rosier muttered in dissatisfaction. Does this guy have some misunderstanding about taking off the odds? Shouldn't he only charge 7 galleons for taking off the odds? He glanced at Travers in disgust. If it weren't for this guy, he wouldn't have gotten into trouble with this evil star today. But now that Anduin had taken the money, he had to agree. Seeing that Rosier was compliant, Anduin smiled and said, Very well, cooperate well, and I will not treat you badly. If you have any information now, you can tell me, whether it's inside or outside the school. As long as it has value, I am a fair person. With that, Anduin put his hand on Rosier's shoulder again, pinching it tightly. Rosier winced in pain and, in a panic, blurted out, I remembered something. I once heard the third-grade senior Quick Wilkes brag at a party that his uncle was going to cause trouble for the Order of the Phoenix around Christmas. But of course, this might just be his bragging, not necessarily true. Are you sure? Anduin's eyes suddenly became extremely sharp, staring at Rosier. Really, that senior Wilkes often bragged to us that his uncle was doing things for the Dark Lord. He once told us stories of their attacks on Muggles, and there were reports in the news, Rosier stammered. A group of cowards, Anduin thought. After being forced to answer a few questions, they spilled everything immediately. He originally just wanted to scare this guy, but he didn't expect to get useful information. Around Christmas? Could it be aimed at Lily and the others? Although he didn't know if it was true, Anduin decided to keep this information in mind. After hearing the news, Anduin let go of Rosier, who was so nervous that his legs gave out, and he sat directly on the ground. Seeing this, Anduin smiled at Rosier. This news is somewhat valuable, so let's waive your protection fee for next month, and this potion is a reward for you. He took out a bottle of Euphoria and handed it to Rosier. Seeing that Anduin still had the potion, Rosier couldn't fathom the depth of Anduin's resources, so he could only accept it. Don't be nervous, Anduin said reassuringly. This is just a Euphoria potion, and you can taste it now. It's good for you, Anduin said, unable to suppress a smile at the sight of the timid young man before him. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he asked, "By the way, isn't your family associated with the Death Eaters? You seem quite eager to betray them." Rosier could only manage a bitter smile in response. "Not everyone in my family follows the Dark Lord wholeheartedly. The one who joined the Death Eaters is my cousin, Evan Rosier. He's the first heir in the family, very powerful, and extremely harsh with us. Few people like him. Originally, our family wanted to remain neutral and protect ourselves, but Evan dragged us all into supporting the Dark Lord. I had no choice. I just wanted to blend in at Hogwarts. His bad luck is his own doing, and it has nothing to do with me." Rosier, feeling utterly defeated, opened the potion bottle and took a sip. The liquid seemed to calm him a bit, and he stood up again. Anduin, surprised by the complexities within these pureblood families, gave Rosier a few instructions. He told him to wait for Travers to wake up and then claim that he had also been knocked out. Anduin assured Rosier that it was fine to blame everything on him, even to curse him in front of others. With that, Anduin pocketed the money bag and left. As Anduin walked away, Rosier finally breathed a sigh of relief. He glanced at the unconscious Travers with hatred and couldn't resist kicking him a few times. Exhausted, he lay down on the grass, muttering to himself, "Anduin is terrifying. His eyes are like an abyss, as if they could swallow you whole. Travers, that idiot, dragged me into this mess. I just wanted to get by quietly, but now everything's ruined. Whatever, I'm tired." With that, he fell into a deep sleep. Rosier! Rosier! Rosier was in a daze when he felt someone shaking him. He woke up instantly to find Travers standing over him. Travers, wincing in pain, said, "You're awake. That bastard dared to attack us. How long have we been out?" Rosier realized it was already night. The cold was biting, and he shivered as he replied, "Let's go back to the castle. It's too scary out here at night, and I'm freezing." Travers, still cursing Anduin under his breath, agreed. Both of them, stiff and in pain, made their way back to Hogwarts Castle. Rosier had been kicked by Anduin, and Travers was injured, but the true danger had been right beside them all along. I hope you all like the new profile update. End of this chapter. Chapter 44, The Ghost of the Snake Courtyard. Travers kept talking as he walked, shouting about making the mudbloods pay, and Rosier beside him could only agree, though he felt deep contempt in his heart. After returning to the castle, both of them caught a cold without any surprise. They didn't even make it to the common room and were taken to the school infirmary by Professor Slughorn, who happened to be passing by. At this time, the Quidditch match was still ongoing. The score between the two teams had reached 290 to 410. If Slytherin could catch the Golden Snitch, adding 150 points would put them in the lead. The players were exhausted, barely able to breathe, and neither side was willing to concede. The Slytherin Seeker was so tired that he sat directly on the grass. The spectators couldn't stand it any longer. 80 or 90% of them had already left, and those who stayed were just there for the spectacle. Professor McGonagall and Madame Hooch came to the center of the arena again to suggest ending the game, but Slytherin still disagreed, even though the players on both sides were utterly exhausted. Professor McGonagall and Madame Hooch could only helplessly glance at each other and continue watching this prolonged game. But all this had nothing to do with Anduin. He was in his room, eating, drinking, and reading the new issue of the Century Charms Journal. Occasionally, he thought about the Quidditch match, wondering if it would ever end. So in the end, the Slytherin Seeker, who was practically a free-range chicken by then, caught the Golden Snitch by luck, and Slytherin won. Anduin asked Vivi at breakfast the next day, curious about how the match had concluded. Yeah, you don't know. That game went on until late at night. The players were too tired to fly, and the golden snitch actually flew right to Velen Higgs. He caught it effortlessly, Vivian recounted vividly. She hadn't stayed until the end, having left when it got dark, but she had learned the details in the common room that morning. Anduin went out to exercise early every morning, and there were not many people in Hogwarts at that hour. Just then, a burst of cheers erupted from the Slytherin table. The hero of yesterday's game, Velen Higgs, had entered the Great Hall. Anduin glanced at the Quidditch seeker. Velen Higgs was a third-year student with short black hair and a strong build. He was very polite, returning every greeting with a nod. When he saw Anduin looking at him, he smiled and nodded, and Anduin returned the gesture. It seemed that not everyone in Slytherin was unpleasant. Anduin had stayed in Slytherin long enough to understand the house better. Slytherin valued ambition, shrewdness, cunning, leadership, and self-preservation. As Anduin had read in a history book about the founders, Salazar Slytherin looked for qualities like intelligence, resourcefulness, strong will, and a certain disregard for the rules. In many ways, Anduin fit the Slytherin mold, so he no longer resented being sorted into this house, except for the annoying pure-blood supremacists. Time passed quickly, and before Christmas, Anduin had mastered the basic spells of all grades, except for some that were difficult to practice alone or were inherently challenging, such as the Iron Armor spell, Patronus Charm, Apparition, Disillusionment Charm, Occlumency, and Legilimency. Anduin had tried the Iron Armor spell and Disillusionment Charm, but the results were not satisfactory. He was confident that he was casting the spells correctly, but Anduin sighed, realizing that his current plan would have to wait until after Christmas. Rosier hasn't been active lately. He's just an idle guy with nothing better to do. Let's leave it to fate, he mused. With his thoughts settled, Anduin decided to find Hagrid for some relaxation. As he entered the common room, he noticed it was bustling with students. Samper Travers glared at him with resentment. Ever since their last encounter, Travers had spent a week in the school infirmary and discovered his purse was missing, which only fueled his anger. However, he couldn't confront Anduin today because Dean Slughorn was present, recording the list of students staying on campus for Christmas. Anduin, having made plans with Sirius, had no intention of staying. After a brief conversation with the dean, he left the lounge without looking back. When Anduin reached Clock Square, he noticed delicate snowflakes falling from the sky, covering the ground with a thin, white layer. "It's snowing," he murmured, a small smile forming on his lips. "Yeah, it's snowing," a soft female voice responded from beside him. Anduin turned to see a familiar-looking girl. After a moment, he remembered she was the girl he had met on the boat when he first arrived at Hogwarts. She had been sorted into Ravenclaw. "Oriana, right?" Anduin recalled her name. "It's rare for the ghost of Slytherin to remember my name," Oriana laughed, her breath visible in the cold air as she teased him. "The ghost of Slytherin? You mean me?" "The ghost of Slytherin is the Bloody Baron. Did you make a mistake?" Anduin asked, puzzled by the nickname. "That's what we first-year students call you. Even though we don't have classes together often, we still see each other around. But many of us haven't seen you for months. Some people even doubt your existence, so they jokingly call you the ghost of Slytherin," Oriana explained, giggling. Anduin was taken aback. This was the second time someone had described him as not human. He realized he had been so reclusive that people were beginning to question his existence. End of this chapter. Chapter 45, The Extraordinary Floating Curse. Anduin didn't dare to be careless, knowing he lacked the strength to stand firm. Oriana, standing beside him, watched as he stared straight ahead into the snow. She felt ignored and thought the boy was being dumb. Her big eyes rolled mischievously, and a playful smile appeared on her face. She bent down, made a snowball, and aimed it at the back of Anduin's head, throwing it as a joke. However, just as the snowball was about to hit, it suddenly froze in midair. Anduin turned his head and glanced at the snowball. Without any visible movement, the snowball reversed direction and flew back towards Oriana at a faster speed, hitting her squarely in the face. The impact knocked her to the ground. Oriana sat up, bewildered, and looked at Anduin in shock. "You're too weak," he said, leaving her with those words as he turned and walked away from Clock Square. Oriana, still stunned, watched him disappear into the distance. After a long pause, she blushed and shouted, "Crazy!" Unaware of the impression he had left, Anduin wandered through the snow, lost in thought. Gradually, the snowflakes around him seemed to respond to an unseen command, slowly hovering around him like a nebula of spiraling stars. Anduin, deep in a state of mysterious perception, felt as if he had grasped something profound, yet elusive. When he finally snapped out of his reverie, he found himself at the edge of the forbidden forest, surrounded by snowflakes that whirled around him like a storm. My levitating spell. It seems to have broken through some limitations, he realized. He sensed that he could now control the snowflakes effortlessly, without the intense focus previously required to make objects float and move. Now, anything within a certain range of his body that could be affected by the levitating spell was under his control, including snowflakes, air, and possibly even water. It seems I can't hold it for too long. I need to change my mood occasionally, Anduin sighed, acknowledging his newfound abilities. A sudden thought struck him. I wonder if I can do this. He tried to mobilize his magic power, and to his amazement, his entire body began to float slowly without relying on any alchemy equipment. Could I fly without a broom in the future? Anduin pondered. He had previously tried to make himself float using the levitating spell, but had always failed. Now, he floated 1/2 meter above the ground, moving up and down, enjoying the sensation. After a while, he landed and considered the practical applications of this ability. Currently, he could only fly to a height of 5 or 6 meters, and the speed was not as fast as a broomstick. However, the experience was undeniably exhilarating. With practice, I should be able to gradually increase both speed and height, Anduin calculated. Today's discovery was significant. The heavy snowfall had put him in a state of heightened awareness, greatly improving his control over magic. Anduin could feel that it wasn't just the levitating spell. His overall sense of magic power had become more attuned. He took a deep breath, gathered his thoughts, and turned to leave the periphery of the forbidden forest. After identifying the direction, Anduin walked towards Hagrid's hut. Since his epiphany in the snow, he no longer stayed in his room all day. Occasionally, he went out for walks, enjoyed the snowy scenery, and chatted with Vivian. With Christmas approaching, Anduin packed up and headed to the station, ready to return home. Inside the steam train, Anduin and Vivian sat face to face, chatting while watching the snow-covered landscape outside the window. Charles had decided to ride with his friends from the academy, leaving just the two of them in the carriage. Anduin, what are you writing? Where are you planning to go after Christmas? My dad is taking me to France for a vacation. I heard the perfume there is very famous. I wonder if he'll get me a bottle, Vivian said, glancing at Anduin, who was scribbling in his notebook. Hearing Vivian's plans, Anduin realized that she had lived in Muggle society before returning to her family. Perhaps this was why there was no generation gap between them. France, huh? Make sure to take lots of photos. I'm planning for Christmas too, thinking about what gifts to give my friends. By the way, what Christmas gift would you like? Anduin asked, feeling a bit uncertain about gift-giving. If it were up to him, he would simply give books, but he doubted many of his friends would appreciate that. If I tell you what I want, then it won't be a surprise. Would you tell me if I asked what gift you want? Vivian teased, rolling her eyes at him. It would be great if you could get me a set of magic symbols. I've been interested in that for a long time, but it's too expensive. Or a set of 200 standard potion bottles would be nice too, Anduin replied, looking at Vivian with bright eyes. He knew her family was wealthy and hoped for something good. Vivian didn't expect Anduin to be so direct. She turned her head away, feigning annoyance. Anduin, unsure of her reaction, decided to change the subject. What do you think I should give to a family that just had a baby? I was thinking of children's toys, but I'm not sure. Vivian sighed, feeling a bit exasperated with Anduin's cluelessness. After a moment of thought, she replied, A newborn can't play with toys yet. Their parents probably already bought everything they need. If it were me, I'd buy some bedtime storybooks or music boxes with lullabies. What do you think? Anduin considered her suggestion and found it reasonable. He crossed out part of his notes and began rewriting. He continued to consult Vivian about gifts, realizing that when it came to understanding girls, he was completely lost. End of this chapter. Chapter 46. Sloppy King Sirius. Soon the train arrived at platform 9 3/4. After making plans to stay in touch, Anduin and Vivian disembarked and walked to the platform. They said their goodbyes, and Vivian left with her family. As Anduin was about to leave alone, he spotted a familiar figure and couldn't help but laugh. "Sirius, what are you doing here?" "Haha, I thought you might feel lonely arriving alone. I happened to be nearby and decided to pick you up. Surprised?" Sirius, wearing a brown coat and with his shoulder-length hair slightly ruffled, still managed to look bohemian despite his efforts to tidy up. "I think you're the one who's lonely and bored. You probably decided to pick me up because you had nothing better to do," Anduin teased, seeing right through Sirius's intentions. "My good intentions are wasted on you. I was worried you didn't have any friends. By the way, who was that girl you got off the train with? Is she your girlfriend?" Sirius asked with a mischievous grin. "Did you never talk to girls when you were in school? Why are you so curious? If you want a girlfriend, I can introduce you to someone. How about Miss Pintz from the Hogwarts library? It's embarrassing that your friends have kids and you're still single," Anduin retorted, knowing Sirius's playful nature. "Ha ha ha! I'm destined to be a free spirit, never tied down. What do you know, you little brat?" Sirius laughed, appreciating Anduin's straightforwardness. As they bantered, they left the station and headed to the parking lot where Sirius's motorcycle with a sidecar was parked. "How about it? Handsome, right? This is my baby. I don't let just anyone ride it. You're lucky today," Sirius said, tossing a helmet to Anduin. Anduin looked at the motorcycle skeptically. "Are we really going to ride this in winter? Aren't you afraid the cold wind will freeze us?" Despite his reservations, he climbed into the sidecar, grateful for the ride. "Why the long face? This baby can not only drive on the ground, but also fly and turn invisible," Sirius boasted, noticing Anduin's expression. "Oh, it's a magical vehicle?" Anduin was intrigued. He began to examine the motorcycle, curious about its workings. "Hey, be careful. If you break it, you can't afford to fix it. Now, where do you live? I'll take you there," Sirius said, a bit annoyed. "Take me to Diagon Alley. I usually stay at the Leaky Cauldron," Anduin replied, reluctantly withdrawing his hand. Sirius knew Anduin had stayed at the Leaky Cauldron during the summer and had visited him there twice. However, he was surprised to learn Anduin planned to stay there for Christmas. "Are you sure? Spending Christmas at the Leaky Cauldron?" "Yes, living in the Muggle world means I can't use magic, which is inconvenient," Anduin explained. Sirius looked at Anduin thoughtfully, realizing he was an orphan. Spending Christmas alone in a bar seemed too sad. "Why don't you stay with me? I live alone. How about it?" Anduin considered the offer. As long as he could use magic, it didn't matter where he stayed. Plus, he had a dinner invitation after Christmas and could go with Sirius. He nodded. "All right, I wouldn't want to impose." "Great, let's go then," Sirius said, revving the motorcycle. They sped off, leaving the station behind, ready for new adventures. Sirius laughed heartily and said, "Ha ha, don't worry about disturbing me. Just don't think I'm messy. It's settled then. Let's go." With that, Sirius started his motorcycle and sped off. As they drove through a deserted street, Sirius had one hand on each handlebar, and the motorcycle soared into the sky. They were flying over London, but no one seemed to notice. This must be what Sirius meant by being invisible, but it was still incredibly cold. The icy wind whipped against Anduin, making him feel the unreliability of this contraption. How could Sirius stand it? Unable to bear the cold any longer, Anduin conjured a transparent barrier in front of him to block the bone-chilling wind. Sirius landed on the street of a Muggle, a community with Anduin. After driving for a while, he stopped in front of a small villa. There was even a garage. After parking the motorcycle, Sirius led Anduin into his home. "Come on in. Welcome to my humble abode. I ran away from home and have been living here since I was 16. I've spent many years here," Sirius said. The house had a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen, a bathroom, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a small courtyard at the back. However, as Anduin walked in, he sneezed at the peculiar smell. The house was intact but disorganized. The floor looked like it hadn't been cleaned in a while, and the dining table was covered in dust. In the kitchen, Anduin found a pile of pots and bowls soaking in the sink, some of which were even moldy. Sirius seemed perfectly at ease. He flopped onto the stained sofa and said to Anduin, "There are 2 guest rooms upstairs. You can choose one, but if I'm busy, I won't have time to take care of you. You'll have to find food on your own." Goodness, are you really a wizard? Don't you ever use a cleaning spell on your house? How can you live in such a mess? Anduin asked, exasperated. What's the big deal? The comfort of living in a house is what matters most. Don't you think I live comfortably? Sirius replied with a nonchalant smile. Anduin couldn't stand the dirty environment, but since it wasn't his place, he went upstairs with his luggage to see if the guest rooms were any better. He walked into one of the guest rooms. The environment wasn't too bad, probably because no one had lived there for a while. The floor and table were covered in dust, but it was manageable. Setting down his luggage in the owl cage, Anduin opened the window. With a wave of his hand, a gust of air swept through the room, gathering the dust from the floor, bed, and desk into a ball and sending it out the window. Today, I received the station short and will be signing the contract soon. Thank you again for your support. Please bookmark and recommend. End of this chapter. Chapter 47, The New Use of the Extraction Spell. Immediately afterwards, Anduin took out his wand and cast 7 or 8 Scourgify spells inside the house. He then used the Aguamenti spell to thoroughly rinse the room, ensuring no corner was left untouched, including the walls and ceiling. After draining the clean water out of the window, he cast a few drying spells on the room. After a while, Anduin was slightly satisfied with the cleanliness of the room. At this time, Sirius's voice came from downstairs. "Hey, I have to go out and meet some friends. Don't worry, I'll bring dinner back later. If you get really hungry and can't wait, there are a few Muggle restaurants around here, including an Italian place that makes good pizza. Just be careful not to let the nearby Muggles see you casting spells." After Sirius finished speaking, he apparated away with a whoosh sound. Meet a few friends? It's probably a meeting with the Order of the Phoenix. Anduin thought for a moment, but didn't dwell on it. He continued to clean the room. After a while, the environment in the room met Anduin's satisfaction. Anduin walked downstairs and once again found the sanitary conditions of the house lacking. He also noticed that Sirius's house had quite a few Muggle electrical appliances, including a refrigerator, a radio, electric lights, and an oven. Unfortunately, there was no TV to watch. After walking around the living room on the first floor, Anduin couldn't stand the mess any longer. He rolled up his sleeves and prepared to clean the house thoroughly. "How can we guarantee the will to fight?" Anduin muttered, complaining about Sirius before he started. First, Anduin went to the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and waved his wand. The pots and pans in the sink lined up in the air like soldiers. One by one, they came to the faucet and were washed under Anduin's command. After being cleaned, they were wiped with a rag, washed again, and then cleaned a 3rd time with the Scourgify spell. Anduin also used the Aguamenti spell to wash every corner of the kitchen and the Scourgify spell to remove stubborn stains. After a while, the kitchen was clean and tidy. Next, Anduin moved to the living room and repeatedly used the Scourgify and Aguamenti spells on the sofa, which was covered with oil stains and grime. However, the effect was not obvious. The stains seemed to have merged with the fabric of the sofa. "So stubborn?" Anduin muttered, stroking his chin in thought. Suddenly, he had an idea. He pointed his wand at the sofa again, but this time, instead of using a cleaning spell, he used the extraction charm he had learned at Hogwarts. With a unique spellcasting technique, the stubborn stains on the sofa were pulled out piece by piece. "I didn't expect that after learning this spell, it would be used for cleaning first," Anduin thought with a wry smile. The spell was incredibly effective. After the stains were extracted, the sofa looked as good as new. Having discovered a new use for the extraction charm, Anduin repeated the process on the carpet, table, and floor on the first floor. The efficiency was even better than using the Scourgify spell. He cleaned every corner of the entire first floor and rearranged the furniture so that everything was in order. Anduin also cleaned out Sirius's refrigerator, tossing away all the unidentified moldy objects inside. He then went to a nearby Muggle supermarket to buy a new batch of food. "The job is done," Anduin said, looking at the renovated hall with satisfaction. His mood improved significantly. At about 8 o'clock in the evening, on the Muggle street outside the house, there was a sense of calm and order. There were no pedestrians on either side of the road. Every house was brightly lit, and some were already adorned with Christmas decorations. Sirius was carrying a pizza box, shaking it slightly as he walked towards home. Sirius opened the door with a bang and was about to walk in as usual when, suddenly, he stopped in his tracks, startled. He stepped back out of the house, looking around suspiciously. "This is my house, right? Why does it look so different inside?" he muttered to himself. Still wanting to confirm, he walked back into the house. All the furniture, carpets, and curtains looked brand new. The air was filled with a sweet aroma, and the lights seemed much brighter. But the most surprising thing was the Christmas tree by the fireplace in the living room. The tree was decorated with small pendants depicting lions, snakes, eagles, and badgers, and a golden 5-pointed star adorned the top. Sirius called out uncertainly, "Anduin?" A young man emerged from the kitchen. He had dark eyes and black hair that casually fell just above his ears. He wore an apron and carried a large plate of roast lamb chops. It was Anduin. He placed the lamb chops on the clean and tidy dining table, then turned to Sirius and said nonchalantly, "Ah, you're back. Good news, your oven still works, and it's quite useful." Sirius was now completely sure this was his home. Holding his head in one hand, he looked at Anduin in disbelief. "What have you done to my home? I've only been gone for a few hours, and it looks like this. And what's with the Christmas tree?" Anduin looked at Sirius, puzzled. "Why? Isn't it good that your house is clean? I just thought it was a bit dirty, so I cleaned it up for you. As for the tree, I saw an old man selling it at a nearby supermarket. I thought you might not be in the Christmas spirit, so I bought one. The decorations on it were made by me using transfiguration. How's my craftsmanship?" Sirius still seemed to be in a dreamlike state and said speechlessly, "You call this casual cleaning? You've practically redecorated my house." "So are you going to eat or not?" Anduin asked, taking off his apron and sitting at the dining table. "Eat," Sirius replied fiercely. "Okay, it's delicious, but I still have to ask, how did you do it?" Sirius asked, stuffing the lamb chops into his mouth. "It's very simple. Break the pistachios into nut pieces, fry the lamb chops with butter and rosemary until golden brown, coat them with the nut pieces, and then put them in the oven. I roasted them to medium well, if you want them rarer." End of this chapter. Chapter 48, Order of the Phoenix. Before Anduin could finish speaking, Sirius interrupted, "I'm talking about my home. Why did it become like this after I left for a while? My God, this scene is even better than when I first bought it new." Anduin thought Sirius was asking how to cook, but he kindly explained, "Please, we are wizards. Isn't this just waving a wand? You can pull it down. I've seen other people use cleaning spells, but it's different from this. Hell, even the oil stains on the carpet are gone," Sirius said, looking around in disbelief. "That's someone else's level." "I have a unique cleaning spell," Anduin said, with a secretive expression. Sirius had eaten dinner, but still seemed in shock. He walked from the living room to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the bathroom, touching and looking at everything as if he were in someone else's house. After cleaning the table, Anduin walked out of the kitchen, glanced at Sirius, and said, "Sirius, there's something I need to tell you." Sirius turned around cheerfully and said, "Well, what's the matter? You really have a good way of taking care of the housework. You're as virtuous as a housewife, and your cooking is delicious." Anduin was quite speechless at Sirius's description. He rolled his eyes and said, "I'm talking about business. I heard that the Death Eaters may attack members of the Order of the Phoenix around Christmas." When Sirius heard this, he became serious and said, "Are you sure? How do you know so much as a kid at Hogwarts?" "You have to know that I, a student at Hogwarts, was assigned to Slytherin," Anduin said to Sirius with a playful look. Sirius raised his eyebrows and said, "You mean?" Anduin walked to the fireplace, sat on the sofa next to it, and motioned for Sirius to sit down as well. "Yes, I heard it from a senior Slytherin named Quick Wilkes. He said he heard it from an elder in his family. Do you know a Death Eater named Wilkes?" Many of the Death Eaters' identities are kept secret. I only know a few people, but I do have an impression of this Wilkes. He and guys like Snape, Avery, Mulciber, and Rosier were very close. I suspected that guy for a long time, but unfortunately, the Ministry of Magic said there must be solid evidence to arrest these guys. They all wear magic masks when they act, so it's useless unless they are caught on the spot. Sirius said bitterly. What do you mean? Even if you already know who some of the Death Eaters are, unless you catch them at the scene, you can't do anything to them, even if they flaunt it in your face? Anduin asked, looking at Sirius with disbelief. Don't these people know what a suspect is? Or are there other forces hindering them? Sirius squinted his eyes, as if recalling something unpleasant, and said, It's true, but since Millicent Bagnold came to power, the situation has improved a lot. In the past, even if someone made some evil remarks or tortured muggles, they couldn't be directly convicted. There are many people in the Ministry of Magic and the Wezengamot who secretly support the Dark Lord. Sirius paused and then continued. However, after Bagnold came to power, her attitude was very firm, and Dumbledore has been constantly lobbying the members of the Wezengamot for support. Now, the means that can be applied are much broader than before. Before, we could only passively defend, which was very frustrating. Can't those suspected Death Eaters be taken away under the pretext of assisting the investigation now? Anduin was surprised at the inefficiency of the British Ministry of Magic and lamented the fierce internal political competition. This is still not enough. Some people dare not offend the Dark Lord, some even support him, and many Death Eaters are members of pure-blood families. They have intricate relationships with many Wezengamot members, Sirius explained. No conclusive evidence to act at all, Sirius said helplessly. Then you have to contact the members of the Order of the Phoenix as soon as possible and warn them to be cautious. If we can prepare, well, this might even turn into an opportunity, Anduin suggested, realizing that if the external environment couldn't be resolved, they would have to find a solution from within. Sirius stood up and paced back and forth in front of the fireplace, deep in thought. After a while, he nodded. Indeed, I need to inform Dumbledore immediately. Whether or not the Death Eaters actually show up, being prepared is always beneficial. However, if the Death Eaters come and discover that we've set an ambush, they'll definitely investigate the source of the leak, which could put you in danger. Sirius considered the situation carefully. Although he valued the warning from Anduin, an underage wizard, he wasn't entirely sure of its accuracy. Additionally, if an attack did occur, the Death Eaters would likely investigate, potentially putting Anduin at risk. Anduin thought for a moment. Although there was a possibility of danger, he had obtained the information from Rosier, making his exposure less likely. The way I got the news is very discreet, so it's unlikely anyone will trace it back to me. Besides, I'm not defenseless. Remember who saved you? Anduin said confidently. Sirius, slightly annoyed by the reminder, retorted, You need to understand, without you getting in the way, I could have taken down those two idiots myself. You weren't injured by the Death Eaters, it was your own recklessness. After their brief exchange, Sirius approached the fireplace, took out his wand, and cast a spell on the fire. Moments later, an old man's face appeared in the flames, faintly recognizable as Dumbledore. What's the matter, Sirius? It's rare for you to contact me directly like this, Dumbledore's composed face asked. That's right, I have a situation to report, Sirius replied. He then recounted everything Anduin had told him and shared his own thoughts on the matter. Well, this is very important information, Dumbledore said thoughtfully. Anduin, I remember hearing about you from Lily before, but I didn't expect you to be living with Sirius. I will host a meeting of the Order of the Phoenix tomorrow. Can you bring Anduin? Some things need to be confirmed in person. Of course, Sirius agreed. End of this chapter. Chapter 49, Assemblies. Sirius turned his head to confirm with Anduin. Is that okay, Anduin? Anduin didn't really care and was actually curious to see the so-called Order of the Phoenix. He nodded and said, No problem. Dumbledore, still visible in the flames, nodded and said, Very well, young man. This way, I can confirm the authenticity of the news. Thank you, Anduin. Seeing this, Anduin replied indifferently, You honor me, Professor. I'm just protecting myself. After all, I am a Muggle-born wizard. Humble young man, Dumbledore remarked. That's settled then. I will inform you in advance tomorrow, and the location will remain the same. With that, he disappeared into the flames. Okay, Anduin, rest early. I'll take you there in person tomorrow, Sirius said, stretching and laughing. Yeah, Anduin replied, though his thoughts were not on the Order of the Phoenix or the Death Eaters. Instead, he was intrigued by the communication magic Sirius had used. It seemed very convenient, and he wondered if there were any restrictions. But now was not the time to ask. He would find an opportunity to learn from Sirius later. The next day, Sirius didn't sleep well. Anduin had not cleaned Sirius's room out of respect for his privacy, so when Sirius returned to his room, the usual comfortable bedroom appeared stinky and dirty. As the saying goes, there is no harm without contrast. After getting used to the clean environment and fresh air of the living room, Sirius couldn't stand his messy bedroom anymore. Sirius walked downstairs with a stiff neck. As soon as he got down, he was greeted by a strong fragrance. The table was already filled with a hearty breakfast, but Sirius looked around and didn't see Anduin. He opened the back door and saw Anduin practicing martial arts in the small courtyard. Anduin was flipping up and down, his fists cutting through the air with a ha-hoo sound. Sirius had never seen anyone with such skill and couldn't help but stare in awe. After a while, Anduin finished practicing a set of Tongjiquan, stood still to collect his breath, and noticed Sirius yawning behind him. You're up late. Are you hungry? There's still time to eat, Anduin called out. I don't usually eat breakfast. By the way, Anduin, what was that you were doing? It looked so cool, Sirius said, yawning with tears in his eyes. Anduin was too lazy to explain in detail and said casually, Don't worry about it. Just think of it as exercising. If you don't want to eat breakfast, I'll take it away. Sirius hurriedly replied, Eat, why wouldn't I eat? I usually don't because no one makes it. Anduin rolled his eyes, thinking Sirius was just lazy. Near noon, Sirius received Dumbledore's signal from the fireplace. By this time, Anduin had also changed his clothes. Seeing this, Sirius didn't waste any time and directly pulled Anduin to apparate, leaving the hut. The two appeared in the middle of a dilapidated alley. Sirius observed their surroundings, ensuring no one was around, and led Anduin to a broken wooden door in the alley. He pulled out his wand, placed it on the door, and muttered something. A phoenix pattern flashed on the door, and it opened in response. Sirius took Anduin through the door, walked through a backyard, entered a room, opened another wooden door, and descended the stairs behind it to a basement. Anduin looked around. The building was made of bricks and wood, looking quite old. There was a large wooden table in the center of the basement, surrounded by many old wooden chairs. The place didn't look like a secret base. It resembled a spare storage room for an ordinary dilapidated restaurant. Several people were already in the basement. In the center was Dumbledore, and next to him was the Auror Mad-Eye Moody, whom Anduin remembered from before. Next to Moody was another. An elegant sorceress, who looked less than 30 years old, stood among the group. On the other side were two wizards. One had a middle-aged beard, a wide chin, a slightly chubby body, and a dignified appearance. The other was a mid-dilly-aged wizard with short reddish-brown hair and no beard, who looked kind, like a friendly uncle. When Dumbledore saw Sirius bringing Anduin in, he smiled slightly. Good afternoon, Sirius, Anduin. It seems everyone is here. Let's sit down and talk. Anduin was momentarily stunned, seeing only 6 people present, including Sirius. He had expected a larger gathering, but obediently sat down beside Sirius. Sirius kindly introduced the group to Anduin. Anduin, you've met Moody. This is Emmeline Vance next to him. The man with the big beard next to Dumbledore is Edgar Burns, and beside him is Gideon Prewett. Everyone, this is Anduin. Anduin nodded to greet everyone, and they nodded back in acknowledgement. Ha! I knew from the beginning that you were very timid, but I didn't expect you to get involved in the Death Eater business now. Are young people today so afraid of death? Mad-Eye Moody remarked, laughing. It was the second time he had seen Anduin, the first being during a fight with Sirius and the Death Eaters a few months ago. Anduin replied, It is precisely because of fear of death that one cannot escape blindly. In such a tense situation, the more you try to escape, the easier it is to become a victim. Believing that everything is going well is the most irresponsible thing you can do for your own safety, isn't it? After listening to Anduin's remarks, several people present couldn't help but admire the young wizard. Dumbledore nodded approvingly. Moody, it seems young people today are wiser than many adult wizards. Several members of the Order of the Phoenix nodded in agreement. Let's get back to the point. Can you explain to everyone the news you got? Moody asked Anduin, his demeanor now serious. Anduin then repeated what he had told Sirius the previous day. Dumbledore and the others listened in silence. When Anduin finished, Dumbledore asked thoughtfully, "So Anduin, what's your opinion on this matter?" Anduin took a deep breath before responding, ready to share his insights with the group. "Thank you for your support. Please consider giving a monthly ticket, a recommended ticket, and a collection." End of this chapter. Chapter 50, Speculation. Seeing Dumbledore direct the question to him, Anduin pondered for a moment before replying. First of all, the most likely scenario is that this news is false. After all, it came from a student, and I can't be sure of its accuracy. Even if the student is truthful, it could be that his family members are exaggerating. Oh, Dumbledore raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Then why did you pass the news to us? Because I'd rather be safe than sorry. Even if the news is false, it won't have any negative impact. But if it's true, and my friends are in danger, I would never forgive myself for not acting, Anduin responded quickly. Well, cautious and wise, Anduin. You handled it very well, Dumbledore nodded approvingly. He then addressed the group. Actually, I received similar information from other sources, which is why I called this meeting. Anduin realized why Dumbledore had taken his information seriously without immediate confirmation. It seemed the headmaster had his own sources. Was it predictive magic? Or perhaps undercover agents among the Death Eaters? The others in the room also seemed to have a moment of realization. It seems likely that the Death Eaters could attack around Christmas. We just don't know who their target is, or whether they're planning a large-scale attack or an ambush on an individual, Edgar Burns said, stroking his thick beard. There's little chance of them targeting individuals. With the holidays approaching, most people will be with their families preparing for Christmas, so they won't be alone much, Gideon Pruitt mused. Then we should remind everyone to be vigilant about personal protection during the holidays. Moody said seriously. Everyone nodded in agreement. If they're planning a large-scale attack, it would likely be when people are gathered. Are there any planned gatherings around Christmas? Emmeline Vance asked gently. Yes, Fabian and I are going to the Burrow to spend Christmas with my sister Molly and brother-in-law Arthur, Gideon Pruitt said cheerfully. Sirius added, Lupin, Peter, Anduin, and I will be attending the Potter's dinner. Dumbledore spoke in a grave tone. The Longbottom family and the McGinn family are also large gatherings. Moody, hearing about these happy family gatherings, said dryly, I'm spending Christmas alone at the Ministry of Magic. Looks like I'm pretty safe. Anduin found Moody's sense of humor amusing and couldn't help but smile silently. What are you laughing at? Living alone is much easier than dealing with a family, Moody said, pretending to be fierce. I agree. I live alone year-round, and it's not as bad as one might think, Anduin replied, trying to keep a straight face. Moody, hearing Anduin's agreement, couldn't stay mad and just smacked his lips. He turned to Dumbledore and said, Most of the Ministry of Magic staff are on vacation for Christmas, including the Aurors. The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes might not be on duty. If no one is monitoring magical fluctuations in London, it will be difficult for us to respond quickly if there's a Death Eater attack. Dumbledore considered this troublesome issue. Christmas was indeed a special time. If an attack occurred while everyone was celebrating, they would be caught off guard. The Auror force would be significantly reduced due to the holidays. If the response is not timely, it may be too late to support. It's really troublesome. Can't we just passively defend? Why don't we go ahead and find trouble with those guys first? Sirius said impatiently after hearing the discussion. Seeing this, Dumbledore could only comfort him. Don't worry, Sirius. We will figure out a way. Provoking a conflict first will only make the situation fall to the Dark Lord's side, making us more passive. And right now, I am not 100% sure I can defeat him. Anduin couldn't help but be surprised. Even Dumbledore was not sure of defeating Voldemort. He wondered just how strong Voldemort had become. Dumbledore thought for a moment and then addressed E-Group. I will think of a way to deal with this. Sirius, take Anduin back first and prepare for a wonderful vacation. Fortunately, we have already made preparations and can act at any time. Just take good precautions. After all, something bad doesn't necessarily have to happen, does it? Seeing Dumbledore's reassurance, Sirius scratched his head irritably and led Anduin out of the basement. The remaining 5 people continued discussing countermeasures. Dumbledore, do you have any guesses? Edgar Burns, one of the founders of the Order of the Phoenix, asked, knowing Dumbledore well. Dumbledore smiled and replied, Yes, I have more information from another source. I'm almost convinced now that the Death Eaters will definitely attack at Christmas. However, I still have some concerns. You mean? Mad-Eye Moody looked thoughtfully at Sirius, who was leaving, as if he had an idea. Dumbledore glanced at Moody and said, Do you know why I only called a few of you here today? I suspect that someone in the Order of the Phoenix may have tipped off the Death Eaters. You must know that most of our members have secret names and addresses, but the Death Eaters don't seem to worry about finding our people at all. Gideon Pruitt asked, puzzled. You mean we have traitors in the Order of the Phoenix? So you also excluded Sirius in advance? Edgar Burns seemed to have thought of something and asked, Could it be? As soon as the suspicion arose in everyone's mind, Dumbledore interrupted. I don't doubt Sirius' loyalty, but his character is not suitable for keeping secrets, Dumbledore said slowly. Is there a target of suspicion? I'm sure it's that guy, Mundungus Fletcher. He has nothing to do all day, so he knows that smuggling makes money, Mad-Eye Moody said angrily, thinking of something. End of this chapter. Chapter 51, Christmas Presents. In the absence of evidence, it's better not to arbitrarily suspect others. What we should focus on now is how to handle what happens next, Dumbledore said, narrowing his eyes in thought. Emmeline Vance, who had been listening silently to everyone's speculations, spoke up. Professor Dumbledore, the points that need to be guarded are too spread out, and the Ministry of Magic won't have many people available at that time. Dumbledore looked at Gideon Pruitt as if he had just figured out a plan. I'll persuade the Longbottoms to spend Christmas with the Potters. I'll also ask Marlene if she would consider spending Christmas at the Burrow. It might be a good choice. Gideon Pruitt smiled gently. I think Molly will welcome them warmly. With only 2 points to guard, we can even set up an ambush in advance. If they dare to show up and make me stand in the cold all night, I won't let them go. Mad-Eye Moody said with a grin. That's fine, but it's best not to explain the reason for this arrangement in advance. We might have the opportunity to hit the Death Eaters this time and possibly identify the traitor. Edgar Burns agreed, nodding. Seeing that his arrangement was acceptable to everyone, Dumbledore nodded. Then it's decided. Moody, Emmeline, please take care of Potter and the Longbottoms. Edgar, I'll rely on you for the Sly's side. I'll be there in case the Dark Lord himself shows up. The rest of the group nodded in agreement and then got up to leave. Dumbledore stayed behind, thinking about the prophecy he had heard a few months ago. He muttered to himself, Tom, can you really harm a newborn child? What a terrible abyss you have fallen into. Dumbledore was certain that the Death Eaters would attack this Christmas. He even guessed who their main target would be, but he still muttered in confusion, which one is it, Potter or Longbottom? Snape, I hope you don't let me down when it matters. On the other side, after Sirius brought Anduin home, he sat heavily on the sofa, his hands under his head, shaking his feet in confusion, probably still worrying about the Death Eaters. Anduin, however, didn't take the matter to heart. He had confidence in Dumbledore and wasn't too worried about what might happen. Sirius, I want to go out, Anduin said to Sirius, who was slumped on the sofa. Sirius, hearing this, was alarmed. Where are you going? It's too late to be going out. What if you encounter danger? Anduin rolled his eyes at Sirius's nervousness. I need to buy some Christmas presents. Besides, I'm not a member of the Order of the Phoenix. Don't be so tense. If the Death Eaters really plan to attack on Christmas, it means it's safe until then. Sirius was still worried. You're still thinking about Christmas presents? Dumbledore might cancel the banquet. Don't make extra trouble. Maybe the Death Eaters will cancel their attack if they know we're prepared. And I'm not going to Diagon Alley or any place where wizards gather. I'm going to the Muggle business district. You can relax, Anduin reassured him. Seeing Anduin's determination, Sirius reluctantly agreed. Fine, but I have to come with you. Don't run off. Despite Anduin's reluctance, Sirius followed him. The reason Anduin planned to go to the Muggle business district was mainly to save money. He had a lot of Muggle currency but less wizard currency, so he had to use it sparingly. First, Anduin took Sirius to Chinatown in London to buy some Chinese condiments. After all, Hagrid was so generous that he nearly finished a box of condiments in just a few months. In winter, Anduin considered buying some vegetable seedlings to plant in Hagrid's garden. He also purchased a large copper pot, the kind used for traditional BJ mutton hot pot. Anduin planned to find an opportunity to enjoy a hot pot meal, as it would be a shame not to. Later, he went shopping for gifts at a nearby mall. Following Vivian's suggestions, he bought numerous children's storybooks and an exquisite music box. The music box played a beautiful lullaby when opened and had a compartment inside the lid where a photo could be placed. For Professor McGonagall, he chose a brooch with a carved lion, and for Professor Flitwick, he bought an elegant mechanical clock. Dean Slughorn received a bottle of aged whiskey, knowing the Dean's penchant for fine spirits. For Hagrid, Anduin found a large copper cup adorned with various monster engravings. Though sold as a decorative piece, he suspected Hagrid would use it practically. For Charles and Vivienne, Anduin gifted each a new set of mahjong tiles, sparing them from borrowing. According to Vivienne, the borrowed mahjong tiles were often used in games between Slytherin and Gryffindor students. For Sirius, Anduin bought a gramophone and a collection of vinyl records, thinking it would suit Sirius's temperament and help him relax with music. Anduin also purchased a variety of greeting cards, wrapping paper, and packaging boxes to prepare gifts for the other party guests. He even bought a new suit for himself. Having Sirius along proved useful as he helped carry the numerous packages. Sirius grumbled while holding a large cardboard box full of gifts as they left the mall. For the next few days, Anduin stayed at Sirius's house. Sirius either disappeared for long stretches, lounged in the living room, or played with the gramophone Anduin had bought him. During this time, Anduin inquired about the mystery of communicating through the fireplace. Sirius explained that it worked on the same principle as flue powder, linking each fireplace through the flue network. The fireplace in Sirius's house was specially connected to the Order of the Phoenix's small communication network, allowing real-time communication but not direct travel with flue powder. End of this chapter. Chapter 52, Christmas Dinner. Seeing Anduin's interest, Sirius decided to give him a copy of Contact Rune Application as a Christmas gift. With the establishment of the flue network, many techniques could be found in the book. After reading it, Anduin felt as if he had discovered a treasure. He had been learning ancient runes and runes recently, and the book provided ample content for him to practice and learn. "So this is Snape?" Anduin asked, flipping through a photo album of Sirius's. There was a group photo of his class, not a graduation photo, but one taken at some event. Yes, this was taken at Professor Slughorn's Slug Club. You see, this is Avery, this is Dolohov, and this is Snape. You should remember their faces in case you run into them later, Sirius explained, pointing out each person in the photo. Anduin was most interested in Snape. He had a senior potions textbook signed Half-Blood Prince. When he discovered the shadowless spell in it, Anduin was almost certain that the Half-Blood Prince was Snape. Judging by the notes in the book, Snape's potion skills were exceptional. In the photo, Snape looked very young, with black hair slightly longer than Anduin's, and eyes that were both melancholy and calm. It was hard to imagine what such a person would look like when he smiled. The next day, it was time to attend the Christmas dinner. Anduin dressed in bright gray slim-fit trousers, a French-style ink shirt, a silver gray short fleece vest, and a narrow tie with bright silver and black stripes. He wore a matching bright gray tight-fitting plush jacket, and his hair was carefully styled. He looked energetic, and if you ignored his height of about 1.5 meters, he resembled a grown-up young man. On the other side, Sirius was also dressed formally, but without a tie. Instead, he left the front slit of his shirt open, giving him the appearance of a handsome rogue uncle. "So you told me we were going to the banquet, and I have to ride your motorcycle?" Anduin had initially thought they would visit the Potter's house via apparition or the Flu network. But when he saw Sirius pushing out his motorcycle, he realized he was mistaken. "Haha, I have to show Potter and Lupin my little baby. Don't worry, my suitcase has a traceless extension charm, so it can hold all your gifts." Sirius laughed, stroking his precious motorcycle, much to Anduin's dismay. Anduin had no choice but to get on the motorcycle, muttering to himself, "I've managed my hair so well. If you mess it up, I won't forgive you." With that, Sirius carried Anduin into the sky, heading towards Godric's Hollow. In the air, Anduin used a barrier spell to resist the cold wind and protect his hair. Godric's Hollow is located in the southwest of the United Kingdom. It is a semi-wizarding community, one of many such places in the country. The only entirely wizarding village in the UK is Hogsmeade. Although many wizards live in Godric's Hollow, they are still not allowed to use magic openly in front of Muggle residents. Sirius landed the motorcycle on the street in front of a large house, then released the vehicle's concealment charm and parked it in the open space beside the house with a smile. However, Anduin was not amused. Despite his efforts to protect his hair, the cold wind had inevitably messed it up. He tried to smooth it back with his hands, but it returned to its previous disheveled state. Anduin glared at Sirius with dissatisfaction, but Sirius just shrugged indifferently and said with a smile, "Stop fussing with your hair. Let's go inside. Don't you think your look is very good now? Like me, bohemian, unrestrained, and romantic. I just didn't want to be like you, so I did it on purpose. Forget it. I'll cry if I talk too much." Sirius and Anduin knocked on the door of the Potter's house. The door opened, and Lily appeared with her long dark red hair, smiling warmly at the two. "Welcome, Sirius. Anduin, you're late. Everyone else is already here." "If it wasn't for Sirius insisting on riding his broken car, we wouldn't have wasted so much time on the road," Anduin muttered, glancing at Sirius with resentment. "Haha, it's the same from morning to night. I haven't seen you in a long time, Lily. You're getting more and more beautiful," Sirius said nonchalantly. Anduin replied politely, "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Potter. Thank you for inviting me to your dinner." Lily looked at Anduin with a gentle smile. "You should still call me Lily. I felt very attached to you when we first met, and besides, you saved Sirius. Of course, you are our friend. Come in quickly. It's freezing outside." "Can you stop saying that this kid saved me? If he hadn't appeared out of nowhere, I would have knocked down those two idiots long ago," Sirius said, slightly dissatisfied. Lily didn't refute him, just smiled at Anduin and led the two into the house. The Potter's home was warmly decorated. Under the illumination of unique magic candles and oil lamps, the house was very bright. A group of people was already sitting in the living room. There was James Potter, whom Anduin had seen before, and beside him sat a young man in old-fashioned dress and a stocky young man. Opposite them sat a man and woman who looked like a husband and wife. One was Frank Longbottom, whom Anduin had met before. He was in charge of delivering him to the leaky cauldron in Nocturne Alley. Anduin remembered that he was an Auror, and the woman next to him must be his wife. "James, Remus, Peter, ha-ha, Merry Christmas!" Sirius exclaimed as he entered, spreading his arms and hugging each of his friends in turn. "Frank and Alice, I didn't expect you to come too. Today is really lively," Sirius greeted the Longbottoms happily. The Longbottoms also happily got up and shook hands with Sirius. Frank Longbottom then said, "Dumbledore suggested that the two of us spend this Christmas together. Harry and Neville were born just a day apart, so it seemed like a great idea for the two little guys to play together. Alice and my mother thought it was wonderful, so we came along." End of this chapter. Chapter 53. Little Harry and Little Neville. When Sirius heard Dumbledore's suggestion, he exchanged a knowing look with Anduin. They both nodded, understanding that Dumbledore had a plan in place. It would be best if nothing happened, but if the Death Eaters dared to show up, Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix would have a special Christmas surprise waiting for them. James Potter looked particularly cheerful today. He turned to Anduin with a smile and said, "Merry Christmas, Anduin. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. I heard you saved Sirius. Lily and I were terrified when we found out he was in trouble. We didn't expect him to be lucky enough to meet a little hero like you." Frank Longbottom, standing nearby, laughed and added, "Yes, I heard about that too. Anduin, you even defeated a Death Eater. Do you remember me? Anyway, Merry Christmas." Sirius, hearing them bring up the incident, looked a bit annoyed. Ever since the chase in Nocturne Alley, his friends had been teasing him about it. He was almost developing PTSD from the jokes. Cough, cough. Sirius cleared his throat, trying to change the subject. "Let me introduce you properly. This is Anduin Wilson, a first-year student at Hogwarts." He then turned to Anduin and continued, "Anduin, this tall man is Remus Lupin, and this is Peter Pettigrew. You've already met James. The other two are Frank and Alice Longbottom." "Hello, Anduin. Thank you for helping Sirius," said the tall Lupin. "Hello, nice to meet you," Peter Pettigrew said timidly. Anduin nodded politely to everyone, and they all greeted him warmly in return. At that moment, a middle-aged woman emerged from the kitchen, hands on her hips, and shouted, "Well, are you all just going to stand there? Come in and help with the Christmas dinner. Don't leave everything to me." Frank Longbottom couldn't help but complain, "Mom, you're not even 50 yet. Stop calling yourself old." Augusta Longbottom, Frank's mother, glared at her son. "Who told you to be such a worry-free fellow?" Seeing this, Anduin stepped forward and said, "Mrs. Longbottom, you've worked hard. Let me help you." Augusta noticed Anduin taking off his coat and rolling up his sleeves. She couldn't help but shout at her son again, "Look at him, a child more sensible than you." She then turned to Anduin gently, "Thank you, child, but let us adults handle the dinner. We don't want you to get burned." Frank Longbottom shrank back, sticking out his tongue in embarrassment. Sirius chimed in, "Mrs. Longbottom, don't underestimate Anduin. His cooking is excellent. I've gained weight from eating his meals these past few days." Hearing this, Augusta looked at Anduin in surprise, and then led him into the kitchen without hesitation. Lily was the only one busy in the kitchen at the moment. Anduin put on an apron and began to process the ingredients quickly. Augusta couldn't help but admire. "I didn't expect you to be so capable at such a young age." Anduin smiled modestly and replied, "I've lived alone since I was a child, so I had to learn to take care of myself." Hearing this, Augusta touched Anduin's head affectionately and said, "Poor child, you must have gone through a lot. It's a pity you weren't born into our family. You wouldn't have had to suffer." Anduin was touched by Augusta's sudden display of maternal love. "Mrs. Longbottom, thank you for your kindness. Your son is also a brave person. I believe you will all be happy." Augusta smiled with relief. Despite her strictness, Frank had always been the pride of her heart. Anduin seemed to have found a place in her affections as well. Anduin seemed to have thought of something, then turned to Lily and asked, "Lily, did Dumbledore tell you what happened?" Lily, understanding what Anduin meant, replied, "Yes, we have all received warnings. James and I have been strengthening our residence with protective magic these past few days. I believe Professor Dumbledore has made arrangements. I heard you gave us an early warning this time, but I haven't properly thanked you yet." Augusta smiled confidently and added, "Dumbledore is very trustworthy. If those Death Eaters are as terrible as they say, they won't dare appear in front of us." Hearing their reassurances, Anduin felt a bit more at ease. He had always harbored a suspicion that someone within the Order of the Phoenix might be providing information to the Death Eaters. If nothing happened today, it was very likely that someone had tipped off the Death Eaters, causing them to cancel their operation. This thought brought him some comfort. With a clearer mind, Anduin decided to help in the kitchen. He used the ingredients available to prepare 2 dishes, a Western-style fragrant mushroom soup and a spicy tuna cake. Augusta's eyes lit up with delight as she watched him cook. Though they hadn't known each other for long, her affection for Anduin grew with each passing moment. When the preparations were nearly complete, Anduin stepped out of the kitchen. In the living room, several people had gathered, watching the 2 little babies crawling on the ground. Anduin joined them, but couldn't tell which baby was which. The adults around had placed the babies on the carpet, encouraging them to try running or racing while crawling. However, the young wizards were uncooperative. One climbed a few steps before sitting down to eat his hands, while the other turned left and right for a while before crawling back. One of the babies was Harry, who would later be known for defeating Voldemort. As a baby, he showed no signs of his future significance. Anduin had never read the original Harry Potter books and wondered if his presence might save Lily from Voldemort's wrath. If so, he wished to prevent the tragedy that befell the Potter family, but he was unsure how to proceed. Was it because Voldemort accidentally found a chance to kill them, or was there some other reason? End of this chapter. Chapter 54. When Anduin was still worried, the group of people watching the children seemed to have had enough. As soon as Sirius saw Anduin come out, he hugged a child and said with a smile, "Hey, look, this is my godson, Harry." He then brought Harry closer to Anduin and said to the oblivious child, "Hey, Harry, this is Anduin. You must remember in the future, don't be as smug as this guy." Sirius, ever the prankster, hugged Harry and made a rude comment, not caring whether little Harry could understand it or not. Anduin rolled his eyes and looked at the clueless Harry. He took Harry's hand and teased, "Hey, little Harry, your godfather may seem annoying, but he's actually even more annoying. Don't be as sloppy as him." Sirius immediately became unhappy when he heard this. He took Harry away from Anduin and said, "What are you doing? Don't teach my little Harry bad habits." Despite his carefree demeanor, Sirius's face was full of love as he held Harry, almost as if he thought Harry was his own child. Anduin played with Sirius and Harry for a while until James called Sirius over. Sirius handed Harry to Anduin and went to see James. Anduin hugged little Harry, looking at the little guy who was still chewing on his hands. He couldn't see the appearance of a future savior at all. After a while, Sirius came back and said, "Anduin, James suggested that we take a group photo together. Come and join us." Anduin agreed and took Harry to the fireplace. James and Lupin had already moved the furniture in the living room, and Alice Longbottom had called Lily and Augusta from the kitchen. They all lined up in a row, with the James couple and the Longbottoms in the middle. Sirius, Lupin, and Peter stood on one side of James, while Augusta stood on the other side. To balance the photo, Anduin stood beside Augusta. James quickly adjusted the camera and motioned for everyone to smile. Soon, the camera flashed, but after taking the photo, Anduin felt something was wrong. He looked down at his arms and realized he was still holding Harry. Everyone had been so busy taking the photo that they forgot to let Lily and James hold Harry. Little Neville was also not held by the Longbottoms, but by his grandmother Augusta. And so they had taken a rather confused group photo. "I say, did you forget something when you took the photo? Did you two even care about your own children?" Anduin looked at the young couple speechlessly. At this point, everyone realized the oversight and burst into laughter. Lily then took Harry from Anduin and said, "It seems Harry likes you very much. He hasn't cried for so long, and I didn't even notice. Do you want to take another picture? Is it still a family portrait without the two children being held by their parents?" Anduin asked. "It doesn't matter. As long as you have each other in your heart, even if you're not together, you're still a family," Lily said philosophically. James and the Longbottoms didn't plan to retake the picture and instead flocked to the restaurant for a Christmas dinner. It seemed that fate was using the photo to foreshadow something, but everyone's future, just like this photo, reflected reality. At this time, Anduin didn't think much about it and joined the crowd to enjoy the Christmas dinner. Everyone savored the Christmas delicacies amid laughter, and after tasting Anduin's craftsmanship, they all gave their praises without hesitation. After dinner, the well-fed crowd gathered in the living room to exchange Christmas gifts. Anduin also took out the gifts he had prepared. For Lily, he had children's books and a music box. For James, he had a beautifully packaged bottle of Euphoria. He also took out other packaged bottles of Euphoria, almost one for each person. Everyone was pleasantly surprised when Anduin presented gifts to everyone, significantly improving their impression of him. Augusta, noticing Anduin's politeness, felt a bit embarrassed for not having prepared a gift for him in advance. She quickly took out a silver chain she had on her and handed it to Anduin. "Origé, Nally, this was a semi-finished piece of jewelry crafted by an artisan." Augusta had intended to add a locket to it, place a photo of her grandson inside, and wear it as a necklace. However, since she had nothing else to offer at the moment, she decided to give this chain to Anduin on behalf of the Longbottom family, reasoning that she could always make another one later. The Potter family also had a gift for Anduin, a set of books titled Mysteries of Magical Defense, which included personal blessings written by Lily and James. Lily, aware of Anduin's diligence and his strong potential in spellcasting, as noted by Professor Flitwick, had copied this rare and precious academic set from the Potter family's library. Anduin was thrilled to receive such a valuable gift and repeatedly expressed his gratitude to Lily and James. Sirius, with a mysterious air, then presented his gift. Anduin had initially assumed that someone as carefree as Sirius would probably just give a bag of gold galleons. However, he was pleasantly surprised when Sirius handed him a small flax bag. Upon inspection, Anduin discovered it was an alchemical item enchanted with a no-trace stretching spell, providing 3 to 4 cubic feet of storage space, a highly useful magical item. This is quite handy. The magic in this bag should last about 4 or 5 years, which will see you through to graduation. I saw you carrying so many things the other day and thought this would be perfect for you, Sirius said proudly. Anduin was thrilled with the unexpected gift. He had been contemplating purchasing a space item for a while, as he often needed to pack a lot of luggage when traveling. However, he knew that such items, with a lifespan of only 1 or 2 years, typically cost 20 to 30 gold galleons. He had been hesitant to make the purchase, so Sirius's thoughtful gift was a delightful surprise. For once, Anduin refrained from his usual sarcastic remarks towards Sirius and instead showered him with praise, making Sirius beam with pride. The room was filled with laughter and joy. However, Sirius, ever vigilant, whispered to Anduin, "I guess the Death Eaters won't show up today. I wonder how things are going at the Weasleys." Despite the festive atmosphere, he remained on guard. End of this chapter. Chapter 55, Raid. Suddenly, a piercing alarm sounded, pulling everyone out of their gathering. "Holy crap, are you a crow's mouth? Come on!" Anduin exclaimed as soon as he heard the alarm, realizing something was wrong. Everyone in the room responded quickly, as if they had been prepared for this moment. They swiftly pulled out their wands. James shouted, "According to the plan, Lily, Alice, Augusta, you stay in the room and protect the boys. The rest of us will go out to fend off the enemy. Frank, warn Dumbledore and the Aurors." Before James could finish his instructions, a rumbling sound came from outside the house. It seemed the defensive magic of the house had been activated, and the Death Eaters were launching an attack. Frank Longbottom waved his wand, and a silver-white ferret sprang from its tip. He muttered a few words to the ferret, which then quickly rushed out through the wall. "Is that a Patronus? Can it still be used?" Anduin wondered, still having time to think amidst the chaos. The rest of the group acted swiftly. All the men took out their wands and rushed outside. Anduin could see flashes of red, yellow, blue, and green magic reflected through the window. Lily responded quickly, handing Harry to Anduin. "Follow me," she instructed. Anduin knew this was not the time to be brave. He obeyed and followed Lily closely. They, along with a few others, headed to the basement. Lily pushed open a door, leading them into what looked like a storage room, surrounded by shelves full of items. After bringing everyone inside, Lily walked to a wall and tapped a few bricks with her wand. Anduin felt a wave of magic spread from the bricks along the wall. "This is a safe house. Once the protection magic is activated, it will be difficult to open from the outside. Support should arrive soon, so don't worry," Lily said with a relaxed expression after performing the series of operations. Anduin, holding little Harry, felt a bit relieved after hearing Lily's words. Augusta, who was holding Neville, remained calm. She looked at Anduin and said, "Don't worry, we are prepared. This is the second time. Let these insidious guys go back and forth." It turned out they were well prepared. Anduin had been afraid of any accidents, but seeing Lily's skilled actions reassured him. Everyone stayed quietly on guard in the hut. They could vaguely hear the sounds from above, the exchange of magical spells and rumbling explosions. They had no idea what was happening up there. Can you imagine the expressions on the Death Eaters' faces when they realize they're surrounded? Augusta said with a smile, even finding the mood to joke. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from outside the basement. Everyone looked at each other, growing nervous. They picked up their wands and watched carefully, unsure if it was an enemy or a friend outside. Could the battle above be over? Soon, they understood. The people outside launched an attack on the room. Everyone inside could clearly hear the bang-bang of powerful spells being released. Magic ripples appeared on the walls and doors, indicating the protective magic was under attack. What's happening? Could it be that Frank and Potter failed to stop the Death Eaters? Why haven't the supporters arrived yet? Did the Dark Lord attack himself? Alice Longbottom asked, her expression slightly nervous. Augusta remained calm, holding Neville tightly. With a wand in one hand and a determined expression, Anduin said calmly, "Don't panic. No one outside knows what's happening here, so let's stay composed." Lily's brows furrowed slightly, but she nodded with a calm demeanor. "I don't know how the Death Eaters managed to break through our defenses, but we can only rely on ourselves now. We need to stay calm and fight back." Anduin nodded in agreement, though he glanced worriedly at the protective magic that was gradually deforming under the relentless attacks. Unsure of how long the barrier would hold, he waved his wand and began piling tables and boxes in front of everyone. "Let's build a bunker. If the door is breached, we need to be ready to attack first." At first, the others were unsure of Anduin's plan, but after his explanation, they saw the logic and began to help, waving their wands to move the furniture. In a short time, they had constructed a semicircular bunker, half a person's height, facing the door using boxes, tables, and chairs. Anduin continued, "If the protective magic breaks, my shield charm isn't very strong. Lily, your protective spells are the best, so you'll handle defense. Alice and Augusta, you two will focus on attacking. I'll cover and assist." Everyone considered his plan and nodded in agreement. Under Anduin's direction, they adjusted their positions. Lily and Alice stood in the middle, while Anduin and Augusta, holding Harry and Naruto respectively, took positions at the back and sides. If a spell came too quickly to block, they could duck behind the cover. With Anduin's clear instructions, the group's anxiety began to dissipate. When people lack leadership, they often succumb to self-doubt and mistakes. But now, with a plan in place, they felt more secure. Anduin observed the protective magic at the door carefully. "It looks like they're focusing their firepower on one spot. Judging by the damage, they'll likely break through the door. When the door is blasted open, I'll control the door panel to obscure their vision. You all take that opportunity to attack. If the door is broken or falls, I'll try to disrupt their balance. Attack quickly and decisively." The others nodded subconsciously, trusting Anduin's leadership despite his youth. Soon, the defensive magic at the door revealed an irregular gap under the continuous assault. With a final curse from the enemy, the door at the entrance flew open violently. End of this chapter. Chapter 56. Defensive Counterattack. "Do it," Anduin commanded, skillfully controlling the door that had been blown off its hinges. He made it fly back sideways, catching the Death Eaters outside the house off guard. They were just about to let out a smug laugh when they saw the door they had knocked down flying back towards them. In a panic, they cast spells at the door panel. Just as the two Death Eaters at the door smashed the door, spells fired by Lily, Alice, and Augusta from inside the room flew towards them. One of the Death Eaters was hit by two spells and was thrown back heavily, while the other reacted quickly, dodging sideways and barely avoiding the incoming spells. Another Death Eater quickly filled the position of the fallen one and launched an attack on the room, but Lily easily defended against it with an iron armor spell. Alice and Augusta also launched counterattacks. For a while, curses flew back and forth, and the two Death Eaters at the door found themselves overwhelmed by the fierce assault. They were forced to retreat and defend passively. At this moment, another figure appeared behind the two Death Eaters and cast a powerful iron armor curse, blocking the attacking spells. The three of them then rushed into the room together. Meanwhile, Anduin was busy supporting a few cannonballs condensed from the barrier charm and preparing another spell. As soon as the two Death Eaters stepped into the room, the ground beneath their feet cracked, and they sank 1/3 into the floor. This was the result of Anduin's extraction spell, which he had been preparing in advance. The soil beneath the ground had long since been evacuated by his spell. Seeing this, the others behind the bunker focused their spells and blasted the two off-balance Death Eaters. The Death Eater, who followed behind, cast 2 iron armor spells in quick succession, but both were penetrated. The Death Eater, who had fallen into the ground, lost consciousness from the barrage of spells. The remaining Death Eater, realizing the dire situation, took out a bottle of potion from his robes. He cast defensive magic with one hand while pouring the potion into his mouth with the other. After drinking the potion, his eyes turned red, and he let out a shout before continuing his attack. He roared wildly, throwing curses, including 2 Avada Kedavra spells. Lily skillfully lifted several pieces of furniture to block the killing curses, which shattered the furniture but also stopped the deadly spells. However, the Death Eater's attacks became more frantic and urgent, forcing Alice and Augusta to defend passively alongside Lily. Just as the Death Eater seemed poised to press his advantage, he suddenly appeared to be out of breath. He clutched his throat with one hand and struggled to cast spells with the other. Within seconds, he couldn't even pronounce the incantations. "Now, take advantage of it," Anduin urged, struggling to maintain his spell while reminding everyone. Realizing this was the effect of Anduin's magic, they quickly blasted a few spells at the Death Eater, who fell to the ground. Finally, all the Death Eaters inside and outside the room were knocked down, and no new ones appeared. Anduin breathed a sigh of relief and lowered his wand, having successfully defended against the attack. Anduin cast a spell on the air around the Death Eaters. He had previously experimented with a rabbit that Hagrid had caught, discovering that it was impossible to cast a spell on a living being that resisted. Only creatures without resistance or dead ones could be successfully enchanted. This led Anduin to consider how this spell could be applied in combat. One method was to act on the enemy's ground, using the extraction spell to pull the soil out, creating traps or causing the opponent to lose balance. Another method Anduin envisioned was manipulating the air in front of the enemy, making it difficult for them to breathe until they suffocated. Anduin had once thought about extracting oxygen from the air, but this required very strong control and perception, which was beyond his current abilities. This was the first time Anduin had used the extraction spell in this manner, and the effect was impressive. A spell with a ballistic trajectory could be resisted, but if the enemy couldn't figure out what was happening, they would be incapacitated by suffocation. However, the spell had its drawbacks. It required strong perception and magic sensitivity to apply the spell to the air in front of the enemy. Additionally, the spell needed to be continuously cast because the air would quickly be replenished by the surrounding atmosphere. Anduin had to concentrate on the spell until the Death Eater was suffocated and speechless, leaving him no time to warn the others. Seeing that no other Death Eaters were attacking, Lily and the others finally breathed a sigh of relief. The intense attack and defense had exhausted everyone. But before they could catch their breath, another figure appeared outside the door. Instinctively, everyone quickly cast spells at the door. The person at the door, not expecting to be attacked, quickly erected a protective spell to block the attacks and shouted, "Don't attack, it's me, look closely." With the help of the dim light, they recognized Mad-Eye Moody. "Thank goodness, you finally came," Augusta said, finally relaxing. "My God, what happened here? There are so many Death Eaters down here. Did you all take them out?" Moody asked, surprised at the scene. Do you think they knocked themselves unconscious? What were you all doing? How did the Death Eaters find this place?" Augusta questioned, her tone sharp now that they were safe. Moody then explained the battle outside the house. He and many Aurors, along with members of the Order of the Phoenix, had been ambushed nearby. Not long after the battle started, they had come to support the scene. Chapter 57, Avada's Life. The battle outside Potter's house was intense, with many Death Eaters engaged in fierce combat. However, under the strategic ambush led by Moody and others, the Death Eaters were caught off guard and forced to retreat. But then, the one who must not be named appeared, Moody said, pausing for effect. "You know who?" Augusta and Lily exclaimed in unison, their faces pale with fear. Moody nodded gravely. Yes, the Dark Lord himself came to support his followers. His magical power is immense. As soon as he arrived, he summoned a flaming snake using a fiendfire spell, aiming to attack us. Just as we were busy defending ourselves, Dumbledore appeared. We had planned for this. He was always on guard against the Dark Lord. When the Dark Lord showed up, Dumbledore provided timely support. He used a powerful spell that seemed like finite incantatum to dispel the fiendfire and engaged the Dark Lord in battle. The situation was chaotic. Everyone was scattered to avoid the Dark Lord's curses, including the Death Eaters. We dared not gather around Dumbledore for fear of interfering with his duel, so we fought on our own. Moody glanced at the group of Death Eaters lying on the ground. I suspect it was during that chaos that these guys sneaked in using disillusionment charms or invisibility cloaks. The situation was so chaotic that it might have been overlooked. What about Frank and the others? Are they all right? Alice Longbottom asked anxiously, her voice trembling with concern for her husband. Lily and Augusta also looked at Moody with worried expressions. Don't worry, your husbands are fine. We fought for a while, but the Death Eaters retreated with the Dark Lord when they realized they were losing. Except for Sirius and Peter, who were slightly injured, no one else was hurt. The Aurors are still recovering under Barty Crouch's command and dealing with the memories of the surrounding Muggles. James and Frank are upstairs watching over Sirius and Peter. They asked me to come down and inform you that the crisis is over. Moody glanced down at the fallen Death Eaters and the makeshift fortress they had created. When I came down, I almost got killed by you guys, he said, shaking his head. Don't expect us to apologize. Augusta retorted, You have no idea what we've been through. Moody shrugged helplessly, a rare smile tugging at his lips. The tension eased as everyone shared a brief moment of relief. But then, a sudden commotion erupted. Behind the group, a Death Eater who had been lying at the end of the line suddenly struggled to his feet and roared, Long live the Dark Lord! Long live Voldemort! Avada Kedavra! The man raised his wand, aiming at the crowd. Only Anduin and Moody were still at the back. Anduin reacted swiftly. As the Death Eater raised his wand, Anduin quickly raised his own, conjuring a powerful gust of wind that knocked the Death Eater off balance. The curse aimed at Anduin and Harry was deflected, shooting harmlessly into the ceiling. Moody, quick to respond, raised his wand and shouted, Avada Kedavra! A green beam of light struck the Death Eater, who collapsed lifelessly to the ground. The others, who had already started to leave, turned back in shock, not expecting another attack. After being hit with a few stun spells, something unexpected happened that shocked everyone. They quickly turned around and rushed in to check. Little guy, your reaction is very fast, Moody said, looking down at Anduin with a sinister smile after killing the Death Eater with the death curse. His smile was more terrifying than that of a Death Eater, Anduin thought, unable to help but complain internally. Anduin responded indifferently, You are very quick to respond as well. God, Anduin, are you all right? This damn guy, I don't know what potion he drank, but he managed to get up, Augusta said, walking over to Anduin with lingering fear. Judging by his crazed appearance, it was probably dragon-crazy blood supplement. Only a group of lunatics would dare to use that forbidden drug, Moody said coldly as he inspected the dead Death Eater. Anduin also felt a lingering fear. If he hadn't reacted quickly, he might not have survived. He realized his mistake of not disarming the Death Eaters in time, which left their wands scattered on the ground. At that moment, Harry, who was in Anduin's arms, began to cry loudly, as if he had been frightened. Even Neville, who was in Augusta's arms, started to weep. These two little ones had been very quiet during the battle, and Anduin had almost forgotten about their presence. Now, it seemed like a switch had been flipped, and they finally cried out loudly. Anduin, not knowing how to soothe children, handed Harry back to Lily. Thank you for your hard work, Anduin. You've been helping me take care of Harry, Lily said, taking little Harry into her arms and looking at him with loving eyes. She bowed her head to thank Anduin. In the previous battle, Lily had been responsible for defending against all frontal attacks, while Anduin looked after Harry. The crazed Death Eater had almost hit Harry with the death curse, but Anduin had responded in time to save him. Lily didn't know how to thank Anduin enough. You're welcome, Lily. We are friends. It's what we should do, Anduin said politely, stretching his left hand, which had gone numb from holding Harry. "Okay, you guys, hurry up. I'll take care of things here." "Go find your husband," Moody said, collecting the wands of the unconscious Death Eaters. Lily, Anduin, and the others nodded and started walking out. Mad-Eye Moody, who remained on the spot, used a floating spell to lift the 2 Death Eaters who were stuck on the ground. He then dragged the Death Eater who had fainted outside the door into the house, placing the 4 of them side by side. Seeing that one of the Death Eaters was about to wake up, he cast another stun spell to ensure they remained unconscious. End of this chapter. Chapter 58. Minister Millicent Barnold. "Come on, let me see who this mad dog is," Moody muttered to himself as he removed the mask from the Death Eater he had just killed. It turned out to be Evan Rosier. I thought it might be him. I didn't expect him to be so deeply corrupted by the Dark Lord. He and Wilkes, who was killed earlier, were classmates. It's really no pity to die if he dares to resist arrest. Moody scolded a few people, then suddenly thought of something and said to himself, "By the way, that little wizard Anduin just now, was that silent casting? And the Death Eaters they took down here, there are more of them than the ones left on the main battlefield. They are truly an amazing group." As they walked back to the main hall, they saw the aftermath of a fierce battle. The main entrance and the walls inside the house were full of potholes. Many Aurors and members of the Order of the Phoenix were helping to repair the damage. On the other side, a group of people had gathered around Sirius and Peter Pettigrew. James, Frank, Lily and Alice embraced their children and greeted their husbands. "Lily, thank God we won. You know what we just went through." James and the others seemed to have no idea until now that some Death Eaters had sneaked into the underground safe house. They embraced Lily with lingering fears. The gathered people turned around to greet those who had just arrived. Anduin saw Edgar Burns, Emmeline Vance, Gideon Prewett, and a man who looked similar to Gideon, likely his brother Fabian. There was also a lady who had a similar temperament to Charles. Presumably, this was Marlene McKinnon, whom Charles had mentioned before. Sirius and Peter Pettigrew, who were surrounded by the group, had gauze wrapped around their upper bodies and their right arms bandaged. It seemed they had been injured in the recent battle. Peter was still boasting about his heroics, describing how he had rolled to avoid a spell, resulting in his right hand being cut. Sirius, who was more seriously injured, didn't say much, but still had the energy to make a face at Anduin. After listening to Peter's boast, Anduin felt it was too exaggerated. The co-author was injured by himself and still used his wand hand. Didn't that mean he did nothing after he fell? Lily, seeing the 2 injured, handed Harry over to James and stepped forward to hug them. "Thank you, Peter. Sirius, you are all heroes today." Sirius grinned, though it seemed to pull at his wound, so he could only say, "No, Lily, it's just a piece of junk. Unfortunately, we only captured 3, and the others were rescued." "Humph!" Augusta Longbottom laughed. "That's not necessarily true. There are still 4 lying in the basement downstairs." "Ah? What? There are still Death Eaters downstairs? What's the situation?" Everyone realized that someone had sneaked into the basement, likely having an affair with Lily's group. James reacted the strongest, hurriedly pulling Lily and asking, "What's the situation? Did a Death Eater sneak into the safe house? Are you injured?" Augusta interjected, "Can't you see with your eyes whether she's injured or not? You don't know how dangerous it was fighting those Death Eaters in the basement." Lily, worried that Augusta might exaggerate, then told the story of the crazy Death Eater standing up and attacking. Lily quickly interjected, trying to calm everyone down. "Don't worry, I'm here. The safe house downstairs is protected by magic. We prepared in advance, and thanks to Anduin's idea, we managed to deal with them as soon as they broke through the protective spells." Lily's tone was deliberately light, not wanting to alarm anyone, but the situation had been far more dangerous than she let on. There were 2 children under the age of 5 present, which only added to the tension. Augusta, standing nearby, understood the gravity of Lily's words and chose not to press further. Instead, he shot a stern look at his son, Frank, who had been fussing over Alice, touching everything and looking around nervously, neglecting his elderly mother. "Hey, Lily, do you know who the Death Eater that died downstairs is? Could it be an old classmate of yours?" someone asked, pointing to the 4 Death Eaters floating behind them. 3 were trapped in a magical sphere, while the 4th, a corpse, floated alone. What? The group was shocked to hear that someone had died. Why did a Death Eater die? What happened in the safe house? Did you kill him, Lily? James asked, his voice filled with concern. Moody, who had just come up, chuckled. I killed that guy. It was really close. If it weren't for Anduin's quick thinking, the Death Eater who drank the mad blood potion might have hit your precious son with a curse. James took a deep breath, his eyes filled with questions as he looked at Lily. Just then, 3 people entered the house: Dumbledore, a middle-aged man with a mustache, and a dignified middle-aged woman. Moody nodded at them and said, Dumbledore, Minister Barnold, Director Crouch. Seeing the Minister of Magic and the Director of Law Enforcement with Dumbledore, everyone greeted them. Minister Millicent Barnold spoke in a slow, gentle tone. Everyone has worked hard today. Tonight is a victory for us against the Death Eaters. 2 were killed on the spot, and 1 was officially arrested. Moody laughed and corrected him. Sir Minister, tonight's haul is even better. 1 was killed, and 3 Death Eaters were arrested. Minister Barnold noticed the 4 figures lying at Moody's feet and was surprised. Is there still a fish that slipped through the net? Barty Crouch, standing beside the minister, looked at the 4 figures in astonishment. Recognizing one of them, he exclaimed, Is that Evan Rosier? The room fell silent as everyone processed the gravity of the night's events. Chapter 59. The Wise Minister. When Dumbledore saw the scene before him, he looked at everyone with a hint of surprise. Noticing Lily and Augusta, who were both observing the group, he smiled and said, It seems that some of you have experienced many wonderful adventures in places unknown to us. Mrs. Longbottom, could you share your adventures with us? Augusta, hearing Dumbledore's request, glanced at Lily. Seeing Lily's helpless expression, she began to recount the fierce battle in the basement safe house. When we realized someone was attacking the protective circle outside the safe house, Anduin suggested we build an internal defense line. Under Anduin's control, the man who drank the blood potion was eventually subdued by us. Augusta explained in detail about the previous battle. Millicent Barnold, upon hearing Augusta's story, was secretly shocked that Death Eaters had sneaked in to attack women and children. He asked, puzzled, Then why did a Death Eater die? From what you said, it seems no one was killed. That was my doing, Minister, Moody interjected. He then recounted what happened after he entered the safe house. Evan Rosier went insane, shouting, Long live the Dark Lord, and cast the killing curse at Anduin and Harry. If Anduin hadn't reacted quickly and interfered, the curse would have hit someone. Seeing the urgency, I cast the killing curse on him. Moody smiled viciously as he spoke, giving the impression of a deranged murderer to those who didn't know him. Well, in such a critical situation, mercy is not an option. I declare your use of the unforgivable curse as a legitimate act of law enforcement, Minister Millicent Barnold announced resolutely. He then turned to Anduin and said, Mr. Anduin Wilson, I declare your off-campus spellcasting as a legal act. Your actions in this critical moment were brave and shrewd. Not only did you help capture 4 Death Eaters in the safe house, but you also protected a child. I will ensure you receive recognition and rewards for your bravery, especially considering you are still a minor wizard. Please continue to work hard. Hearing this, Anduin immediately felt energized. He had heard that the new minister was shrewd and capable, and now he understood why. While he wasn't keen on becoming too famous, the mention of a reward made him happy. This is what I should do. I can't stand by and watch my friends get hurt, Anduin said, though inwardly he was overjoyed. Minister Millicent Barnold nodded approvingly at Anduin's words. He then proceeded to encourage and commend Lily and the others individually, before ordering Moody to take the prisoners and the body away. Dumbledore, observing everything with a smile, couldn't help but look at Anduin a few more times. He keenly realized that their safety and victory were largely due to Anduin's command and spellcasting at critical moments. Dumbledore thought to himself, It seems he is a promising young man. I should take the time to learn more about him. But why did these Death Eaters target women and children at such a critical juncture? Judging from Rosier's actions, it is likely he received orders from Tom. It seems the prophecy concerning Harry and Neville has greatly concerned our Dark Lord. As Dumbledore pondered the connection between the two prophesied children and Voldemort, he also considered the next steps in their fight against the Death Eaters and Voldemort's intentions. It was clear that one of the chosen ones was either Harry or Neville, but which one? It seemed necessary to find a way to get in touch with Snape again. Meanwhile, after listening to Augusta's remarks, James turned to Lily with remorse and apologized. "I'm sorry, Lily. At such a dangerous moment for you and our son, I wasn't by your side. I failed to fulfill my responsibilities as a husband." Lily comforted him, saying, "Don't say such things. No one could have imagined this happening. I didn't want to mention it before because I didn't want you to worry. Instead of apologizing, you should take some time to thank Anduin. He saved Harry's life." James nodded and looked around for Anduin. At that moment, Anduin had already approached Sirius. Seeing the two of them talking, James decided not to interrupt and planned to thank Anduin later. Anduin stood beside Sirius, observing his friend's battered appearance. With a smile, he asked, "It looks like you're seriously injured. Can you still move?" Sirius coughed a few times and replied bravely, "Humph, what's the matter? Even if there's another battle, I'll be fine. It's just a lung injury." It turned out that Sirius had been too reckless in the previous battle and had been pierced through the chest by a Death Eater's sharp blade curse, making it painful for him to breathe and speak. Dumbledore approached them and said, "Sirius, we need to get you to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Although your injury has been treated superficially, you still need proper medical attention." Sirius wanted to protest, but Anduin lightly poked his wound, causing Sirius to cough violently for a long time. He could only glare at Anduin angrily. After a while, Sirius managed to say, "Cough, what about Anduin? I'm worried about leaving him alone at my house, although he should be able to take care of himself." James joined the conversation and reassured him, "It's okay. You can go to the hospital without worry. Anduin will stay with me during this time. I'll take him to pick up his luggage tomorrow." Seeing this, Sirius nodded helplessly, glared at Anduin once more, and said, "Boy, don't try to show off like you did today. It'll get you into trouble sooner or later." Anduin, noticing Sirius's concern despite his own injuries, replied, "If you want to talk about showing off, look at yourself. You've ended up in this state." Then he turned to Headmaster Dumbledore and said, "Professor, can I ask you for a favor?" Chapter 60, Secret Meeting. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows and said, "Please, Mr. Wilson, I don't think I have a reason to refuse today's hero." When Anduin heard Dumbledore complimenting him, he couldn't help but smile awkwardly and said, "It's just that I heard Minister Barnold say he is going to give me a commendation. I wonder if it can be done privately. I'm not one for the spotlight, and drawing too much attention might not be good." Hearing Anduin's request, Dumbledore understood his concern. He recalled that Anduin was a member of Slytherin House and then said, "I understand what you mean. I will ask Minister Barnold not to publicize your commendation in the media. Perhaps I can also suggest that he exchange your award for more tangible rewards. How does that sound?" Anduin laughed happily and said, "Thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore." Immediately after, Dumbledore left with Sirius and Peter Pettigrew. Before Sirius departed, he instructed James to take care of his precious motorcycle. Anduin noticed that despite Sirius's injuries, he was still concerned about his bike, and he couldn't help but roll his eyes silently. After a while, the Aurors finished their restoration and memory modification work in Godric's Hollow. The damaged part of Lily's house was repaired with the restoration charm, and the Aurors, along with the members of the Order of the Phoenix, began to leave. The Longbottoms and old Mrs. Longbottom, who had experienced the basement battle together, also said their goodbyes to Lily and Anduin. Augusta invited Anduin to visit her when he had time, and Anduin gladly agreed. Soon, only the Potters, Harry, and Anduin were left. "Anduin, you worked hard today. Thank you for everything you've done. I'll take you to the guest room so you can rest here tonight," James said with a smile. After everything that had happened, he had come to recognize Anduin as a friend. Previously, James had been hesitant to invite Anduin to the Christmas dinner at Sirius's suggestion but Lily seemed to have a good impression of the Muggle-born teenager, so James couldn't object. After tonight, he admired Anduin's courage and wit in a time of crisis. Anduin looked at the now empty house and nodded to James. "Okay, then I'll stay." "Don't say that. You are our friend, and after tonight, you are our comrade in arms and benefactor. You can stay here with peace of mind. Our door is always open for you," James said with a laugh. Lily, holding little Harry, nodded to Anduin with a smile. And so Anduin spent the rest of the Christmas holiday peacefully at the Potter's house. Meanwhile, after Dumbledore sent Sirius to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, he did not return directly to Hogwarts. Instead, he went alone to a hill in the depths of the Forbidden Forest next to Hogwarts, seemingly waiting for someone. Dumbledore didn't wait long. Soon, a figure appeared in front of him through apparition. It was a Death Eater who gently took off his mask, revealing a gloomy face. "It seems that Tom believed that prophecy," Dumbledore said coldly, looking at the man in front of him. "Their attack on the members of the Order of the Phoenix tonight was just a diversion. Several Death Eaters who sneaked in almost killed Lily and her child. Is that what you wanted to see, Snape?" Dumbledore's words made Snape's usually cold expression gradually distort. He struggled to respond. "The Dark Lord who sneaked in didn't tell anyone, including me. If I had known that such a thing would happen, I would have stopped it." "Stop it? How would you stop it? Do you still have the courage to stand in front of the Dark Lord? The moment you leaked the prophecy to him, things." Dumbledore's voice was stern and unyielding as he addressed Snape. "He is like a derailed steam train, unstoppable. His target is Lily and her children. You know that." His eyes bore into Snape's, devoid of any emotion. Snape, upon hearing this, slumped like a gambler who had lost everything. He stubbornly retorted, "The Longbottom child could also be E1 from the prophecy. No, it must be the Longbottom child. I will persuade the Dark Lord to believe this, to direct his wrath towards the Longbottoms instead." "Severus!" Dumbledore's cold demeanor shattered, replaced by a flash of anger. A powerful wave of magic erupted from him, silencing Snape instantly. Dumbledore's gaze hardened as he continued, his voice icy. "Don't be naive. Do you know what your good classmate Evan Rosier did today? He infiltrated the Potter's house, drank the potion of mad blood, and risked becoming a lunatic forever just to kill Lily and her children. If it weren't for the boy's quick response, you might have had to say goodbye to Lily today. This act made it clear to me that Tom's goal has always been unambiguous." In truth, Anduin had saved both himself and Harry at the scene, but Dumbledore chose to omit this part of the story without any hesitation. "No." Snape's composure crumbled. He fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands as tears streamed down. He had followed Voldemort faithfully, without question, but now, with the woman he loved in danger, his resolve wavered. "I know, I always knew," Snape confessed, his voice filled with anguish. "I could feel it when I was with him, but I never wanted to face it. The prophecy isn't about a woman. It's about a boy born at the end of July. But I don't think Tom would mind eliminating his mother, too." Dumbledore's words cut deeper into Snape. "I know," Snape whispered, his voice breaking. "I know the Dark Lord has identified her children. He has been hunting them, trying to kill them. I just learned that today's target wasn't the Order of the Phoenix, but them. The Dark Lord was certain they would be there today." Snape's pain and despair were palpable. He had tried to deceive himself with lies, but deep down, he had always known the truth. He just hadn't wanted to face it. End of this chapter.